But when it comes to the one another, when it comes to the family of God, when it comes to the fellow believers, love like Jesus loves, self-sacrificial. I believe what Jesus wants for us is to be in community with each other in a special way that's different from all other human relationships. The best phrases for that are fellowship, community, and family. The metaphor we use for that in our church is fire. And this is a picture I've used many times before. It's a picture of coals. How many of you like cooking with charcoal? Yeah. I've tried propane before, and you know what happens with me with propane? I get too excited. I turn that puppy up all the way. I throw the meat on, hear the sizzle. It sounds so awesome. I check it in 2 minutes, and it's black. I mean, it's just all messed up. So I've eschewed propane entirely. I can't handle myself with it. But charcoal is slow burn. Charcoal is a little bit of patience. Charcoal is you got to put up with a little work to get it going. Once you get it going, it goes. And it does its job well. It does its job smoothly. But if I take one of those coals off the charcoal, take it off to the side, my whole bunch of charcoal is going to burn for an hour or two. It's just going to smolder and keep going. In fact, after I'm done cooking, I go inside and I eat. And then I go back outside with marshmallows and the whole family roasts them on the charcoal. It's fun. It's still good to do that. But that coal that I take off the side and put it in the grass, you can't do anything with that. It's dead. It's gone. We use fire as a metaphor for our community because we understand that we need to be together in order for us to have fire. And so Jesus says, I want you to have this new relationship with the one another. You can love everybody, yes, but there's a new relationship with the one another. And if you are not part of the one another, you're missing out on Jesus' new command. Now, I said we use fire as our metaphor, but it's not just because of this charcoal analogy, no matter how much I love it. It's because the Bible itself tells us some fascinating things about fire as a metaphor. And so for the rest of our time today, we are going to race through the Old Testament and a couple places in the New Testament to see some fire metaphors at work. And our first place is going to be Exodus chapter 3, verse 1 through 10. If you have a Bible, you're going to have to do a lot of flipping. If you have the electronic thing, you have to do a lot of tapping. But let me just invite you to follow along because I'm not putting these on the screen. Exodus, it's the second book of the Bible. Genesis, then Exodus. We begin chapter 3. It says this, Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Horeb is also referred to as Sinai. In fact, later on today, we're going to take a look at Sinai, and it's the same mountain. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see the strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. First of all, Moses sees this fire and he's intrigued by it. But we are told that both the angel of the Lord is in the fire and we are told that God's voice comes from the fire. Now this is key because in the Old Testament when we see the phrase, the angel of the Lord, I believe that 9 times out of 10, this is referring to Jesus making an appearance before he had a physical body. Because the angel of the Lord is quite oftentimes worshipped as God. And it's when the angel of the Lord shows up that then it tells us God speaks. Sometimes other angels show up. And it doesn't say the angel of the Lord. It just says a messenger or a man dressed in white or something like that. But here we believe that this is Jesus himself in the bush somehow. And Moses doesn't see a body, he sees flame. And the presence of God is being represented by this flame. Let's keep going. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, this is another thing. This God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob thing. You realize this is 400 years after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're told that the Israelites spent 400 years in Egypt. How many of you know your ancestor 4 generations ago? How many of you know your ancestor 400 years ago? When I say Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it means the same to you as it meant to Moses. Those guys are way back there. Man, can you imagine an angel coming up to you and he says, I'm the God of your father, George Washington? You'd be like, okay, am I related to George Washington? How's that work? See, this is the thing. These people have been in Egypt for so long, they've lost any sense of their own identity. They've lost any sense of who their God is. They don't have any system. They don't have any laws. They don't have anything. All they have is this rumor of a story that got passed down to them throughout the centuries about this guy Abraham or this guy Isaac or this guy Jacob. They just have this rumor of the story. None of the Old Testament has been written yet. None of it exists. These people they're just milling around figuring out. And God shows up and he says, I'm the God of that guy way back again. And Moses says, well, at least I know you're God, so I'll take off my shoes. I'll bow my head. But let's keep going. The Lord said, verse 7, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. They're now living in slavery there. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. And I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. The fire in the bush represents the presence of God. And God has shown up for these people. In fact, this is the way I put it on your note sheet. Jot this down. Fire represents the presence of God, and it shows up to unite God's people for His glory and their good. God says, I've come down to bring them out. His presence comes for the group, the community. He's building something of unity and freedom. Let's keep going. After they leave Egypt, and you can read the story there, eventually Moses leads the people and God sends all these plagues, and Pharaoh eventually says, okay, fine, take them. And so they leave, and when they leave, we come to chapter 13. And in chapter 13, we get another picture of fire. And we pick it up in verse 21. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Once again, fire shows up, and fire represents the presence of God, but this time it's there to give the people a common focus. It's there to give the people a common focus, because at this point, God says, you need to know who's in front of you. You need to know where you're going. You need to know how to get where you're going, and it's by following me. It's by looking at me. So God shows up to give His people a common focus. Let's keep going. Exodus 19. Flip over a couple more pages. When we get to Exodus 19, they've found themselves at the base of Mount Sinai. And at the base of Mount Sinai, God is ready to give the people the 10 commandments and all the other laws. So we come up to verse 10 in chapter 19. It says this, and the Lord God said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Skip down to verse 16. On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Picture standing in front of Mount St. Helens when it blows. Picture standing in front of some other volcano where it does its thing, and you get the terror that these people are feeling. But what's more important is that once again, God comes to this mountain in fire. He shows up. Once again, fire is a representation of the presence of God, and he shows up this time to give his people common guidelines. You see what's happening? So far, everything that's going on is God showing up using fire to represent his presence, and he's showing up for the purpose of building his people together. Whenever he specially shows up in fire, he's building his people together. I'll say that again. Whenever he shows up in fire, he's building his people together. First, he brings them out. Then he gives them guidance. Now he gives them guidelines. And we come to Leviticus chapter 10. I love this story. It makes me laugh and it's sad at the same time. But in Leviticus chapter 10, the book of Leviticus is Moses' guidelines from God on the mountain. So he gets the 10 commandments, he comes down, the people are worshiping the calf, he breaks those 10 commandments because he's mad, and he fixed the situation with the calf, then he goes back up, he gets the 10 commandments a second time, brings them back down to the people, gives them to the people, he goes up on the mountain, he's up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and God is giving him all these rules and all these regulations for how the community should live, and that comes down to us in Leviticus. That's Leviticus. But there's this one section in Leviticus where right after God appoints Aaron and his sons to be the high priest and the priests of Israel. Right after that, we find this account of something that happens to his sons, Nadab and Abihu. So God has just told them all these rules. He tells them these rules about, okay, I want you to build this tabernacle looking like this. That's the tent where people are going to come and see the high priest go in, and he's going to meet with me in there on behalf of the people. Then in the tent, I want you to put this special kind of incense. I only want you to use this special kind of incense. God says there's one kind of incense that needs to be holy to me. That way you know that I deserve only what I ask for, and so give me this kind of incense. Then there's a special kind of oil that gets burnt as in the lamps in the tabernacle. So only burn this oil in the lamps in the tabernacle and keep this flame burning 24/7. Keep it going all the time. And here are your priests, and here comes Nadab and Abihu, Leviticus chapter 10. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, great names, by the way, name your kids this, took their censers. They have individual